those emails than ever before. And the point of this event is to help you with that. Our goal is to, for our policy newsletter for this session, to act like you're getting it in real life and get the opportunity to ask questions, and we'll be happy to answer them. And if we don't know the answer, we'll make sure to connect you as well. So there's a couple of key things going on in the policy realm, and we'll be happy to talk about that today. So my name is Ryan Weber. I'm President and CEO of the KC Tech Council. We have the rest of our team members on as well. The KC Tech Council has three main pillars to our organization, which includes policy advocacy, which is the point of this, as well as industry access and workforce development. And guys, I even showered. I put on real clothes today. So I want you to know I'm taking this very seriously. And it feels good. I feel like I'm actually at work right now. So this is a whole new day for me. And as we go through this, I want you to feel comfortable as well. I want you to make sure that if you've got a question, you can ask it. And for those of you watching on Facebook, our team is checking the comments as well. So feel free to drop questions inside there and they'll ping me so that we can answer those. And if you want, let's go ahead and get started. So again, thank you and welcome to our policy newsletter IRL, which means in real life. First things first, make a little plug. KC Tech Council has a number of ways to engage you in a couple of upcoming events, and specifically one that's going to be a lot of fun next week with Tech Trivia. Now, it's almost sold out. If you have not registered a team, you need to do so quickly. There's only so many people we can get on a Zoom call, and that is going to be a very busy event. Oops, sorry guys. So we're excited to do this and happy to do it. So if you get the opportunity to register a team, I would do so today because that is going to sell out very quickly. And we also have launched a unique opportunity with the Happy Tech KC hashtag. There's a lot of good news coming out of the tech industry in Kansas City, and the team has put together a unique way to use a hashtag, the Happy Tech KC, to share those great stories about tech. But also, quietly behind the scenes over the last year, we've been secretly emailing these thumbs up trophies to people. And those thumbs up trophies have been sent to those who have made an impact in the tech community, whether they're members of our organization or not. And as soon as we get back to a normal life, we're excited to start sending those out through the mail service again. But in the meantime, we're taking it digital. So if your company is doing something unique and you'd like to share with our team, use that hashtag. We're tracking it, and we'll be happy to share that on our social media accounts as well. So 2 events and opportunities for you to engage with us going forward. Okay, if you are not receiving our newsletter, I would encourage you to go to our website and do so. You can sign on and just subscribe to the KC Tech Council as well. Here's an example of our newsletter. And this was from last month, where we had the chance to introduce our Public Policy Committee Chair, Josh Maxfield, who is Associate General Counsel for Garmin. And the KC Tech Council Public Policy Committee is actually a separate entity from our board of directors and from the organization, and we do rely on them to give us advice on what policy matters we are going to support, which policy matters we are going to monitor, and then sometimes we choose not to support various policy issues. So this is an example of one of those newsletters with quick information and updates, as well as active legislation that we're following. And we're going to go through some of this today. So I just want to show that little highlight. Before we get started, too, I want to thank our public policy partners at Polsinelli. Our policy committee helps guide the organization on what we're going to engage in, but Polsinelli serves as our lobbyists, specifically in Jeff City in Missouri. So we do appreciate that partnership and representing Kansas City's tech industry in Jefferson City. And again, if you want to engage with the Public Policy Committee, there's only a few parameters. Number one, you got to be interested in policy. You do not have to be an expert, and that's why we rely on our partners and our lobbyists at Polsinelli to help be those policy experts. It's a perfect opportunity for someone who's just genuinely interested in learning more about policy and how the political world works and how you can influence those decision makers at the highest level. If you're interested in serving, we do ask that you be a member of the Tech Council. And just simply email me with that interest, and I'll make sure that you're added to the group. There's voting and non-voting members, and it's a simple way to stay connected. And again, if you want to make sure you're getting this newsletter, you do have to be subscribed to the KC Tech Council mailing list. which is available right on the homepage of our website. There's been a lot of news about tech policy recently here locally and nationally. So locally, I'm going to dive in significantly to a federal bill that Senator Moran from Kansas filed recently in regards to data privacy. And then also we have been advocating at the federal level, specifically to the Small Business Administration and the Department of Treasury, to encourage the relief bills, which we'll talk about here in a second too, that they're including venture-backed startups. You know, a lot of those are tech companies. And even though they may be some of the smaller employers in town, I did a little quick research on this to find out how many VC companies in Kansas City would have not qualified because of these rules from the SBA. And they're called affiliation rules. And unfortunately, we have not heard an update on whether or not venture-backed startups are going to count in some of these or be allowed to leverage some of these programs. But we're still advocating on their behalf, not only just with the KC Tech Council and to our local lawmakers, but through our federal partners as well. I put up a list of a couple of these partners just so you know who I'm talking about and who we partner with on a regular basis. These groups are registered lobbying groups, and we do have lobbyists from those organizations that help basically advise the KC Tech Council on federal tech policy issues. One of them is not a registered lobbyist, just saying that's TechNet. That's an organization that we are very involved with, and I serve as the federal public policy chair for the tech councils in North America, which includes about 60 different tech councils. Some are statewide, some are regional across the entire continent. And amongst those 60 members of TechNet, we represent about 22,000 technology employers, very influential group. And some of you may recognize Consumer Technology Association. They put on a big event in Vegas at the beginning of every year called the Consumer, or CES, Consumer Electronics Show. And then CompTIA, many of you are familiar with their ability to provide training for A+ certifications, a number of other things. And TechNet, which is strictly an advocacy group. These are some examples of partners that we often work with federal policy issues that affect the tech industry. Okay, we've got to talk about some of these federal stimulus bills because there is a chance some of you may not be aware of these bills and how they can affect or help your company. The Payment Protection Program is still active. There are still funds available. And this is a great opportunity for those of you that have under 500 employees who are not a venture-backed startup and would like to seek some relief in some very progressive opportunities to even get some loans forgiven, as well as help you keep your employees in your company during this time. If you're looking for any more information on PPP or EIDL, there is so much available to you. And even if you're looking for a local banker, these are things that I'm happy to help with. Just do me a favor and shoot me an email if you still need help connecting to someone who can be a resource, whether that be a banker or others. I'm happy to help. There's two things in there, really three things I'm gonna talk about real quick. Just announced this week, the Federal Reserve Bank has announced a Main Street Fund, and more information is coming out about this on a regular basis. So we are actively tracking this, but it's another hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to be available for companies. So far, it looks like it's going to be structured very similarly to PPP and EIDL that are distributed through the Small Business Association. So stay tuned on that. So if you didn't qualify or if you didn't get a chance to participate with either PPP or EIDL, or more importantly, you know somebody who may need to know this information, the Federal Reserve Bank is going to have additional resources and more information available very soon. There was a great effort by local leaders here in Kansas City, kind of led by AltCap, Kauffman Foundation, and a number of other key folks to create the KC COVID-19 Small Business Relief Fund. The several millions of dollars that were available went like that. And that is on pause right now. So if those were funds you are seeking, just stay tuned. There's other opportunities out there. And federally, we do believe that more relief bills are on the way. Though those details right now are just speculative, know that as soon as we have information, we will share that with our audience. And if you're looking for a list of resources, please go to our website. But also for those of you that are entrepreneurs, there's a number of great ways for you to see what available resources there are for you at KC SourceLink. I would encourage you to go to their website and view their small business financing information, and specifically that is for entrepreneurs. Now, let's dive into one of the most important federal tech issues that's facing Congress right now. So this is very new information where Senator Moran's office in Kansas has done a great job of leading on an issue that is very complicated. And it is something that's going to affect all of us as consumers, as well as all of us that run tech companies or involved with online business. If you may remember, the European Union created a similar bill called GDPR, or General Data Privacy Rights or Protection Rights. And that was a really a big shockwave across the tech industry, and a great bill to protect EU citizens, but the cost to comply was pretty significant. And ironically, in America, we don't have protections for consumers online. There's some that's limited, but recently the state of California moved forward with their own version called CCPA. And again, another ripple effect in the tech industry. The concern here is that without federal law, states will start to create their own versions of data privacy rights, and some may be limited and some may overreach. But imagine if you're a tech leader and you essentially have to start complying with 50 different state laws. That is going to be extremely burdensome, and in reality, something that may not be possible for a lot of startups to afford. So it's a great honor to say that one of our own senators is leading the charge on this, and he is very passionate about protecting small businesses along the way. And recently was in negotiations over the last year with creating a bipartisan bill, and there was really one issue that the other side was stuck on, and it has to revolve around private right of action. Can individuals sue companies that don't comply, or create class action lawsuits for companies that don't comply with federal law? And unfortunately, they were not able to reach a settlement on that, but Senator Moran, with his great leadership, went ahead and filed the bill anyways. And so now we are reviewing drafts of this and seeking information and feedback from members, because this is going to be highly discussed as soon as we are as soon as we are done with the coronavirus crisis. There's a few key things in here I want to talk about, and I'll give more detail as far as what these mean. But first thing that the bill seeks to do is create federal preemption of state laws. Now, California was first. We do expect that others will follow suit. Because of the recent crisis, many of those state bills have been put on hold. So that's not necessarily all of a bad thing. But once we're out of this, we do expect some of that to change, where more states will continue to participate with these bills. So federal preemption, again, is very important to create a level set of rules across the entire country. Second thing is providing consumers control. And this was a big part of GDPR and CCPA. Essentially what this says is that your data is your data. And if you opt into a company to get access to that data, sometimes in lieu of a free service like Facebook or Twitter or Google, then you should know what that data is being used for, and if those companies are going to be selling that data to third-party providers. Even more importantly, if you ever want to opt out, you should have the control to do so. And right now, that's not necessarily something that consumers have. This bill would create protections so that those companies would be required to erase your data, to delete your data. And that has been a very important part of GDPR. If you guys remember, there was the Cambridge Analytica crisis with Facebook a couple of years ago, and it was GDPR that really brought that to light, because the people that were affected by that misuse of data leveraged that law, and their ability to be forgotten, basically, is what it's called. So the right to be forgotten is how the European Union describes this. And that is going to be something that we all need to keep in mind. If you're building products, if you're building databases from now forward, I hope you're keeping in mind a functionality that at some point you may be required to delete a user's data set. And that can be very challenging with blockchain technologies and other innovations that we're not even familiar with yet. But if you're building any sort of website, any sort of online business right now, you have to think about security, but now you have to think about privacy. So that is a big part of this bill. It's going to be highly debated as far as how this is going to be regulated. But remember, the goal is this to have consumers with control. Third part of this is basically creating appropriate scale requirements. So again, if you're a startup or a small business, limiting that burden that you may be experiencing from compliance. So that is the goal of that. I think it's very important to give credit to Senator Moran and his team for including those provisions in this bill. Those of you who are in the security realm, or if you're a CIO or work with CIOs, you know just how important consent is. So if there has been a breach, there should be very specific requirements about when you need to notify users about that breach, but also notify them that that their data is being used or sold, and in what ways that could be used by those providers. So there's information in the bill about that as well. Again, the goal is that there are some measures and frameworks that if you're going to be providing an online service, you've got a basic level of security in place. And again, this bill will outline what those basic security measures mean. It's important to weigh in on this because if it does overreach, again, that can be very expensive to comply with security. And we've seen that with CCPA. There was a very popular lawsuit filed days after CCPA went live against a very large tech company because they didn't have a chief information security officer actively working at the company. They were actually recruiting that position. So believe it or not, that could have potentially got them out of compliance. So the words that are included in this section are going to be very important. Okay, last but not least on this issue, Senator Moran's bill does include provisions that the Federal Trade Commission would be the oversight and the enforcement of this law, as well as including state attorneys general so that they could be able to enforce compliance at the state level as well. So that was an important concession so that the states would not be excluded from this federal bill. And the way that they're outlining that is, again, there would be additional funding and resources available to the FTC, and then state AGs could also have the opportunity to enforce that law within the realms of the federal guidelines. So again, this is a very important bill. It's going to affect every single one of us. There's very few people left in America that are not online consumers. So again, this is going to be a very important issue. It could be one of the defining tech legislative bills of the next several years. So that's why I'm taking so much time to go through this. Now, we will be asking for your feedback a lot on this, specifically with measures that may or may not already be in this bill. So it's got a long way to go before becoming law, but it's something that's going to likely be an important part of the discussion in the Senate and then also on the other side in the House. So stay tuned for more information on federal data privacy and security. Okay, a couple other things real quick. March was a very active month until, unfortunately, the crisis that we're all currently experiencing. I'll go through some of these in more detail, but I want to let you know how we're engaging on this. You know, sometimes the KC Tech Council and our team, letters of support and things that we sign on to with other groups are basic functions of policy advocacy, but we also do actively participate, whether that's in person or writing written testimony based on your feedback. Rarely are we providing that testimony without outreach to our members, even providing that with simple surveys. It's a very important part of the process that we get your feedback before we provide that feedback to lawmakers. That's really our goal in how we're actively pursuing legislation. We don't speak just on behalf of our organization, we speak on your behalf. So getting your feedback is incredibly important. And again, it was a very busy month at the state level, but also at the federal level. I'm going to go through some of these real quick. At the federal level, I just want you to know that when we're providing letters of support, rarely is that alone. I mentioned those federal partners earlier. Sometimes there's hundreds of organizations that are pursuing these letters of support for various things, whether it be computer science funding at the very top, whether that be clarification on the affiliation rules that I mentioned earlier, supporting specific bills like Senator Moran's Consumer Data Privacy and Security Act, and then also bills that just get renewed on a regular basis, like the innovation program, making sure they continue to be appropriated. So there's so many different things throughout the year that we're supporting and tracking and updating now in this newsletter. Let's get down to the state level though. In Kansas, one thing that's not mentioned here, but I want to highlight, we had a very important victory with computer science education. That was not a policy issue necessarily that went through the legislature, but it was a lot of advocacy with the Board of Education. I can't thank the Department of Education in Kansas and their staff enough, specifically Stephen King, who is a great advocate and really spent over 2 years working on this to define computer science standards and then presenting a number of different measures to advance computer science throughout the state. And I'm happy to say the State Board of Education passed those recommendations unanimously. Now the hard work is in place to make those things real. On the legislative side, though, I do want to highlight a bill that we've been advocating for called the Kansas Angel Investment Tax Credit. This is a unique policy measure because it doesn't necessarily affect a ton of people or companies, but it is a great piece of legislation and a competitive advantage for the state of Kansas. For entrepreneurs that are going to be raising funding, which is not an easy process. In this part of the country, it can be a very difficult process. This makes it a lot easier where they can provide a tax credit to investors. And even though we're not talking about a ton of people, we're talking about a lot of money. Millions and millions of dollars gets raised in this part of the country. And what I've heard directly from those angel investors is this program helps them to invest more money and more often. And what we've seen is a large portion of the companies that participate in this program are technology companies. They are likely the future large employers, the future game changers of innovation. And if this bill helps them raise money, it's very important. There's a piece of this that's also incredibly important. These tax credits are transferable. So if those companies raise money from investors in some other state that don't have any sort of Kansas income, they can sell those credits back and essentially create liquidity. I've personally been involved with several of these transactions, and I can tell you this is a really unique and important piece of legislation that needs to be renewed on a fairly regular basis. Unfortunately, with the crisis that we're currently going through, it may not get renewed this year, but it's not necessarily critical that it was renewed this year. But if it's not renewed in the next legislative session in 2021, the program could end. So please stay tuned on that. It's a very important bill. And really, it's in our testimony in front of the Commerce Committee, the key point I made was it's the last competitive advantage for Kansas to attract early stage and growth stage companies to be located in Kansas. And since we have a city that borders both states, if that investment tax credit goes away, that's really the last competitive advantage that exists for those growth stage companies that are raising money. In Missouri, there's also a handful of bills that we've been advocating for since the very beginning of the legislature. Everything from Hyperloop and public-private partnership language to designations for universities to additional funding for workforce development and education. Unfortunately, these are all on hold right now because of the crisis, and I hope that there could be a special session this summer in Missouri, or this fall, I should say. Usually those are in September, and potentially some of these bills could be passed through, but unfortunately, because of what's occurred, we may have to revisit each one of these in the next session in 2021. So stay tuned. These are the three most important that we've been tracking since the very beginning in Missouri. Okay, so I threw a lot at you. So hopefully this was a much more entertaining experience than just reading our newsletter, clicking a bunch of links. I see there's been a couple of questions in the comments here that I'm going to ask you too. I see one from the web here too. Kara, do you want to help me out with some of these real quick? Or
yeah, you bet. I'm happy to ask them, and if you could field them, that'd be great. We had two submitted. We had a web submission page for this event, and a couple good questions came in. So the first one, kind of going back to the data privacy updates, and this sort of overlaps with some current events. Will some of the emerging needs around future contact tracing, I'm assuming this is regarding the COVID situation, a lot of which will happen via mobile devices, what will this play in the contents and the passage of a future Data Privacy Act, and from what you've seen and heard?
Yeah, if you've been following anything online, especially what's happening in other countries where citizens don't necessarily have the protections that we have, those governments have been very active in using your personal mobile device as a way to individually quarantine people who have tested positive for the virus. And right now that is not legal in America. There's also a lot of debate about the effectiveness of that. Some would say that's been an incredibly effective tool. Others would say that hasn't necessarily stopped the curve like they planned. In regards to how the bill that we talked about would affect something like that, you would still, even with the federal program, unless there was an executive order for something like this, and that would still be a very rare, very highly contested piece of legislation, but you should be able to opt out of that. There's still a lot of testing as far as how the federal government can even text message citizens in crises like this. So stay tuned. The American government, I'm sure, is, and I know I've seen a lot of rumors around this, but evaluating the role of mobile devices in this pandemic, but also the potential for any additional resurgences of this virus or anything that we would deal with in the future. And we do got a lot of people here that work in the telecom industry, and I would imagine they will weigh in significantly on this. The best organization to learn more about this is the Federal Communication Commission, the FCC. And we will be tracking this. I know this has come up from a number of different news stories. And so people, I've always been worried that the government's listening to you on your phone. I can tell you that's not legal, but if that was ever to change, then there could be a lot more interactions with citizens through mobile devices. And I think based on what's occurred over the last month with the COVID crisis, that's looking more and more likely.
Great. And then, we had a comment around data privacy from Brian Hadaway, one of our participants on the call. Brian makes a good point. The key consideration for data privacy is not to be terribly different than GDPR or PIPEDA, Canada's regulatory standard. Creating more and different regulation makes it that much more difficult for global industries to operate. Your take on that, Brian?
Yeah, I totally agree, Brian. I appreciate you mentioning that comment, because if you want to do business globally, you got to play by a lot of different sets of rules. And when GDPR first was being passed through the European Union, there was extreme concern about how that would affect the operation of companies, or even an EU citizen visiting an American website, even though that business didn't do business in Europe. And they're still figuring out a lot of those complicated challenges. And so are the companies that operate across multiple borders. And here in this part of the world, here in North America, I think as you know, we've been very active in providing feedback for the bill that Senator Moran filed. In fact, personally, I testified in front of the Senate Commerce Subcommittee last March, based on the feedback that we received from our members. And one of those key items was that it can be extremely burdensome if there's not federal preemption to then comply state by state. And that burdensome would be in terms of cost. Attorneys' fees to just comply, but also if you are found to be in breach of some of these or out of compliance, then the fines are significant. And what we've seen with GDPR is it's millions and millions of dollars, or 10% of your gross revenue, whichever's higher. So if you are, and there's no strikes, by the way. So if the enforcement agency finds you out of compliance, for a small or startup company, that could be the end of the company. So getting this right is very important. But also federal preemption is very important, because what we are most concerned about is now that California has set the rules for the first data privacy law, other states are not likely to just copy what California did. Many of them will go deeper and pursue further opportunities to enforce different aspects of that. And that is a grave concern right now. And that is something that we are actively tracking through our TECNA network. So my peers who run state tech councils across this country, we are all tracking these policy measures very closely, because we want to know what provisions are being included by lawmakers so that we can be prepared to address those, not only in the state they're being proposed, but if that ever comes up in Kansas and Missouri, I want you to know that we will be prepared to address those issues if they overreach and don't protect consumers or tech companies, but are simply just burdensome to comply.
Great. And then we've got one final, and we're right at time, so this is perfect. Another one that was submitted from the web, I suspect a board member. What is the most important thing the industry can do to help fund CS education progress and expansion on a state level?
Yes, in both states, Kansas and Missouri, your local school boards decide everything. So local control is something that has been in place for a very long time. Both states and their departments of education are active, basically resources for those school boards to be able to understand that they are meeting accreditation and that the funding is distributed through that as well. But your local school board is going to be the key deciding factor to whether or not computer science is available at all your local high schools. Our goal is not that one high school is going to teach computer science. And the reason why is that not every student has a car or transportation. So this needs to be a subject that's available to all students at every school. And to get there, there's going to need to be significant funding for teacher professional development. So teachers can learn how to teach computer science. Right now, what we've found is that a lot of those teachers, very few of them solely teach computer science full time. So they are often teaching multiple subjects or just one other subject in addition to computer science. So releasing that burden by getting more teachers to be able to be trained, and they're eager to do so, there's just not funding to provide that. Most teachers who've pursued those education opportunities have done so out of their own pockets. So please, whenever there is a school board election, I want you to make this a campaign item. I want you to ask those who are currently serving and those who are running for local school boards how they plan to support computer science. And here's why. For a young person who's going to be graduating high school in today's world, if they are not literate in a number of different ways, one of which is how to use technology, specifically computers, their life is going to be very different than someone who has had that experience and knows what these devices can do, and even be interested in pursuing additional training after high school, whether it be in college or not, and finding their way into the tech industry. Tech industry jobs here in Kansas City, from a median wage standpoint, pay 82% higher than the median wage for the everyday worker in Kansas City. So it's incredibly important at the very micro level of the school boards that we're advocating for those who are in charge of how that is going to be distributed across the district. They are in charge of who's going to be in charge of those districts. So we've got to make this a priority for those local boards. Okay, Kara, I'm over time. Anything else?
That should do it, Ryan. Good job.
Okay, thanks everybody. Take care and have a great rest of your day.